Dr. Erik Davidson is a finance professor at Baylor University, specializing in behavioral finance. He's also a retired chief investment officer from Wells Fargo and a former business partner of mine and a colleague from my Templeton days. We've brought Erik back into the economic war room to dig down on the notion of stakeholder capitalism and the risk that it might pose if we are not careful. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
All right, I want to start with the basics. What's the first thing you tell your students about the goal of a corporation?
Yeah, it's funny. When we start off a semester in a finance class, we actually get very philosophical very quickly, and we talk about what's the goal of a firm. And it often leads to some very interesting conversation. People obviously talk about profits, but then soon the students will start talking about the importance of employees and customers and community environment. And then inevitably someone will start talking about, hey, I read this thing about stakeholder capitalism. And all of a sudden everyone starts jumping on that, like, what a great idea that is.
It is a good idea.
Yeah. But the challenge there, as we discuss it, is like, I hear you, but at the end of the day, what's really important, what the goal of the firm to do is to maximize shareholder value. And they push back against that. And don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that customers don't matter. I'm not saying that employees don't matter. I'm not saying the community doesn't matter or the environment. But all of those in sum total, if you don't take care of those, you will not maximize shareholder value. But if you start to focus on those other things, you'll become distracted. It's sort of like, is rebounding important? Absolutely. Defense? Most certainly. Passing, shooting, dribbling? All of those are really important. But if you end up focusing on any one of those, and you can win the rebounding game, but you can actually lose the game.
Right. The score is what matters.
The score is what matters.
You're channeling Milton Friedman a bit here.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So, yeah, and that's the problem, is that stakeholder capitalism, while every stakeholder needs to be cared for,
absolutely.
And as Christians, our duty is to make sure that we're not leaving segments of this nation behind.
To do our work as unto the Lord, we talk about, yeah.
But things can go off the rails.
Yeah.
We've seen this massive wealth gap that's created. We have short-term thinking, for example, at the cost of long-term outcomes. We've been harming the environment. But that, and all those, stakeholder capitalism wants to focus on those. But what does stakeholder capitalism really mean? Who are the stakeholders?
Yeah, so the stakeholders, as we mentioned, are these other entities. Again, not to minimize their importance, but if you put any of them over the shareholder, you run into problems. If you put the customers over shareholders, you won't have a business. If you put the employees over shareholders, you won't have a business. If you put the community or the environment, all these are really, really important. But, again, kind of back to the Bible, you can't serve two rulers. And, when we get distracted, when we try to, that leads to failure.
Yeah, well, profit is kind of how you measure success, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're not making a profit, do you continue in business? Not for very long, right?
Yeah. No, imagine a coach who says, talking after the game, and he said, we did a great job today. We out-rebounded the other team. We got more rebounds. We got more steals. We had more assists. Yeah, but the other team scored more points than you did.
Right.
The objective in sports is to win the game. The component parts of that are all these other things.
Now, I think President Biden, he might have a limited concept of stakeholder capitalism and said, hey, let's make sure we don't leave out these other groups. He might have that. But there are certain political elements that have a very broad view of stakeholder capitalism. And if you take a really broad view, isn't that really just socialism?
Yeah, that's the concern. And again, to continue our sports metaphor here, we want a level playing field. We have to be relentless of getting towards a level playing field, and we don't. I mean, there's systemic issues that we continue to need to improve and address, and we need fair officials, right? And we need to continue to make the officiating more and more fair in the sense of regulators and a government. But you can't start affecting the outcome of the game. That's not the goal. The goal is to make it a level playing field with fair referees, and let the beauty of the free markets take over from there.
Yeah. Well, my friend Rod Martin, he contrasts what happened in the Russian Revolution with Mussolini's National Socialism. And it really was a brilliant point. He talked about the illusion of private ownership. What happened with Russia is Lenin comes in and they just kill all these people that stand in their way, and they have to wipe out so many people. Mussolini, when he took over in Italy, he did a different approach. He said, hey, look, you own the business, you can continue to own the business, and you can continue to feel like you have a stake in all this. He gave the illusion of private ownership, but then he said the purpose of the corporation is to serve the state. And what they ended up with oligarchs that were controlling everything, and it was, in his mind, a better path to socialism because there wasn't all this mass bloodshed. Unfortunately, we ended up in World War II, and we ultimately had the bloodshed anyway. But the idea was they had the illusion that they had the freedom, and I think that we're seeing a lot of that taking place right now today. But here's what I'm really concerned. What if the state has been captured by the big business instead of the state controlling big business now running the state?
Yeah, and that's the challenge. As we need to be relentless of a level playing field from both sides, because the risk of drifting off into socialism is a strong one, but also the risk of drifting off into crony capitalism as well, and neither is right. And that's why, to be relentless and doing everything we can to remove the systemic issues that create this unfairness in favor of maybe the crony capitalists or otherwise, is something that we need to be diligent about.
Yep. Now we're going to have to take a break. When we come back, I want to walk through the implications of a truly woke version of stakeholder capitalism, and then later what we can and should do about it. Erik, we've been talking about the shift to a stakeholder capitalism approach as the Biden White House is proposing. Let's jump from the nice-sounding theory to the practical and the political implications. And one of the first proposals Biden came with out of the chute was a nationwide $15 an hour minimum wage. That's a stakeholder-friendly proposal. It's pro-employee, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, you've lived in, New York? I've known about LA, Tokyo, Denver, Carmel, and now Waco, Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, are these all the same?
Oh, by no means. The cost of living is so much different, and to impose minimum wages that maybe would work in Manhattan in other parts of the country just doesn't make sense. And, Kevin, as you know, my area of specialty is behavioral finance. And one of the biggest decision-making errors that we make from a financial perspective, or in many perspectives, is we count the cost, but we don't count the opportunity costs. And particularly when we talk about the minimum wage, is these issues of what are the opportunity costs, right? It's wonderful, and I want everybody to make a lot of money, right? But who gets left off, right? I've had minimum wage jobs, you've had minimum wage jobs. I never thought with my minimum wage job working at a gas station back in the day that this is what I want to do forever. But it's a tremendous on-ramp for me to get into the workforce, right? With no skills, it was a tremendous way.
Essentially, the minimum wage makes it illegal for an employer to pay an employee. So we're just literally throwing away lots of potential jobs.
Yes. Yeah.
And it can't be uniform, as you said. It's not the same in New York or Tokyo or Waco.
Yeah.
And then the other problem is, how do you know what's the right amount if you don't let the market set it? Maybe we should have $100 an hour minimum wage.
Yeah.
Or $1,000 an hour. we could all be rich.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and by my last reading of it, I think approximately 2% of all of our workforce is at minimum wage. But again, what's at our current federal minimum wage of 7.25, and maybe it would make sense. I mean, that was set a long time ago. It hasn't taken into account inflation, but I mean, a move to 15 would be really dramatic. And again, my concern is the opportunity costs for people that maybe will lose jobs, or even more importantly, people that will never get jobs.
Yeah.
And oftentimes these are the unskilled or the young looking to get into the workforce.
Then you have to have guaranteed government payments, right? And that becomes another problem. Yeah. Let's switch to another stakeholder, the customer, right? Why shouldn't we lower the cost of everything? I mean, I see prices going up. Every time I go out to eat, it's getting more expensive. Maybe we should mandate that the price has to go down so I can get a filet mignon for $4.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be a good idea?
Yeah.
Or free. Wouldn't free be better?
Free would be great, yeah. And then you'd spend your entire day driving around trying to find that $4 steak or that free steak. It would not be available, right? There's a demand side, and the demand side wants lower prices, but then there's also the supply side. And we've seen what that looks like, right? You have to have supply and demand coming together, otherwise.
And that's what a free market sets,
Yeah.
is that point. How about underserved communities? We've got a couple of books here, The Financial Crisis Inquiry Report and Hidden in Plain Sight by Peter Wallace. And in 2008, they were reacting, the banks, the big banks were reacting to some laws that had been put in place that mandated that, everybody ought to be able to own a home. And so the Community Reinvestment Act and other laws said, hey, that is our social good. That's what we need to strive for, like rebounding. It's absolutely essential, but when you mandate it and you force a company to follow that as their primary objective, doesn't that create some financial problems?
Oh, absolutely. Again, you want the free market, and the free market's not perfect, and there's systemic issues that need to be addressed. As you know, my family is a multiracial family, and there's issues out there. There have been historically, but the solution is to continue to work diligently to make that a level playing field. But if you put in place these non-economic forces, that can be problematic. We talk a lot about in finance. Would it be nice to have a 0% unemployment rate? Sure, it would, but that just doesn't make sense. So there's this idea of a natural unemployment rate of maybe 3 or 4 or 5%. Likewise, would it be wonderful if everybody owned a home? Most certainly it would, but there's sort of a natural maximum home ownership rate, because not everyone wants to own a home, and people are moving, and renting actually might make more sense. So to push it, and we saw that with the housing crisis, is that we probably stretched it too far, and we had too much home ownership in our country because of all these mandates and maybe uneconomic incentives.
Oh yeah, and including mortgage interest deduction and everything else. Yeah, here's another one that's coming up. NASDAQ has proposed that they're going to require that every board have a certain gender and racial diversity on the board. As you know, my background, I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, so I qualify. I don't know why that makes me more qualified to be a board member, that I've got that. Is there a point at which this becomes ludicrous, that you mandate that you have a board that looks a certain way?
Yeah. In the world of finance, we talk about diversity a lot. We call it diversification. And it really is sort of the secret sauce of investing. When you have diversification, you have different investments. You have stocks and bonds and commodities, and you put these together, and it's almost an alchemy that you can have a better portfolio outcome.
Right.
Better returns, lower risk, by bringing together these disparate investments. The same applies not only in financial capital, but also in human capital, by bringing them together. It's powerful. Right. It's wonderful. I'm a huge proponent of it. I just have problems with the mandate of it, doing it, right? You're in a hotel lobby and a football team walks in. You immediately can look at them and say, look, that guy's probably a lineman. That guy's maybe a receiver. Oh, that guy over there, he's definitely the kicker, right?
Right.
They're not all going to look the same, and that's the power of bringing that together. And that football team is going to play much better and win more games against a team full of all linemen or God forbid, all kickers, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
But what if the requirement was to play here, all linemen on your team have to be 5 foot 1 inches tall and weigh 130 pounds because we want diversity of weight in our play. I mean, there comes a point at which the mandate versus the market. The market should determine it. So maybe the better approach is to educate people that having a broadly diverse viewpoints makes for a better board, and the investor says, that's got a diverse board, I want to invest there, rather than NASDAQ saying you can't be listed if you don't have this particular. All right, we're going to have to take another break. When we return, I want to talk about the best way to serve all stakeholders, including those who are investing, without the heavy hand of government and without destroying the economy. Erik, we've been talking about stakeholder capitalism and the risks of going off the rails one way or the other if the government starts mandating things. You know, one direction is the government mandates, and then we're all Harrison Bergeron, and we're all, you know, you've got to do it this way, and the government controls everything, and that destroys the incentive and destroys so many things. The other way is that you say, well, you know, government's not going to be involved at all, and you have corporations overtaking government, and then you have crony capitalism. So what's the answer? Yeah. Tough question?
Tough question, yeah. Obviously, again, getting back to the sports metaphor, the extent that we can create an environment where things are fair, where it's a level playing field, and let the magic of the free markets take over is incredible. And then to add to that, I do think that there's this importance of a moral and ethical underpinning to all of that. I think really, you know, in this life is probably about as close to a perfect world as we can get.
Yeah, we talk about moral democratic capitalism here a lot. Capitalism may be a wrong word because it offends some people, but moral, I mean, we know Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. Before he wrote Wealth of Nations, he wrote Theory on Moral Sentiments.
That's right, yeah.
So we got to be moral. And if you want to destroy the environment to make a short-term profit, you know, I think as an economist, I think of it in time horizons, right? So there's an eternal time horizon. I believe there's a God I'm going to have to answer to, and there's a price to be paid if I'm really harming other people. So moral's important. And democratic, you talked about level playing field. We want everybody to have a fair and equal shot at opportunity. So the best can rise.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of our country, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, our country is a melting pot, and you know, we get down on ourselves a lot for being too racist or too this or too that. But when you visit other countries, you realize that we actually have plugged in some really bad history. No question about it. We can't hide that. But we have some really good history too.
Amazing! And in a vibrant economy, that's the impact of immigrants. You know, look at Tesla, look at Google, look at eBay.
Right.
You know, started by immigrants, right? So yes, it's powerful.
Yep. And capitalism, it's a bad term, I know. But let's use the term free market.
Yeah.
Describe what you think a free market does. I
think a free market is the beauty of bringing together all these views and all these opinions. It's very similar to democracy, but instead of one person, one vote, it's $1, one vote. And it really is the huge clearinghouse of information that gets captured in this thing that we call the price. And in that price is where supply meets demand, where a willing buyer and a willing seller meet. And that's the beauty, and it really helps to determine where resources should be going in our economy. It helps to meet consumers who have demand, and it helps to meet the needs of businesses who have the supply, and it's magical.
Let's jump into that. How does the free market serve employees? That's a stakeholder. Now we've got a free market setting the price. How does that serve employees best?
Well, the beauty of a free market for employees is that, as the saying goes, is that human capital goes where it's welcome and it stays where it's well treated. And you can go out into the marketplace and you can bring your skill sets and you can be paid for that handsomely. And if you invest in yourself and train yourself and have some certain skills, then you'll get paid really nicely.
Now, I think of the example where the free market was removed. Major auto companies in Detroit at one point, where labor had so agitated the boardroom that they said, you know what, keep those people, let them stay employed, put them under contract, but we don't need their work anymore. And so they just kept paying them to sit around and play cards or whatever. And there were the payroll at General Motors was outrageous. And what did that lead to?
It led to the bankruptcy of the company.
Yeah.
And then layoffs, and so highly problematic.
So the idea is the free market sets it, and there's some government to prevent. You don't want any exploitation and slave labor and all that. You have to prevent that.
Yeah, you have to have agency where someone can willingly bring their services to the market, and yes. Absolutely.
So how does the free market then benefit, let's say, underserved communities? Let's say you've got communities that have historically not had the same opportunities, they don't get the same education, they may not be able to engage. How can the free market help them?
The free market can help those communities by allowing people to get jobs and then to start businesses in those communities, and not necessarily having the crony capitalism that prevents that, and for them to be entrepreneurs. And we're seeing that in so many of these communities these days. And so to create wealth, to own homes, these sort of things. So that's extremely powerful, and with that goes all the benefits for the families, for the communities, for the individuals.
Yeah. Well, I'm worried that we're going to create 10 problems by solving one, focusing just, using your analogy from earlier, we're going to be the #1 rebounding team in the country, and never practicing shooting, never scoring baskets at all, or never playing defense. I'm worried that we'll create 10 new problems by solving one and focusing on that. A top-down government-mandated approach, has it worked in history?
No.
What about Soviet Union?
No.
Maoist China?
No.
Venezuela?
No.
But China's prosperous.
Yeah. I tell you, Kevin, as you know, I spent a good part of my career in Asia. And with the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997.
Yeah, you and I were there shortly after that.
Yeah. But leading up to that, the Hong Kong stock market plunged, right? Many Hong Kong Chinese left, and construction stopped. But it was interesting. We were all concerned about the Chinese takeover of Hong Kong. Eventually, after it took place, and it wasn't as bad as people expected, one of my colleagues says, you know what, we had it all wrong. It wasn't a Chinese takeover of Hong Kong, it was really a Hong Kong takeover of China in terms of capitalism being unleashed. Now, there's lots of problems in China, don't get me wrong, but China has been transformed through the unleashing of capitalism and consumerism in that society. And that's been, again, a long ways to go, but that has been transformational to that country.
Yeah, there's no question. All right, so that's one off the rails is top-down mandated control. The other off the rails is crony capitalism. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think we deal with that through, this is where we have to be on the lookout for monopolistic behavior, right? We have to think about, the interactions between businesses and government, where you have these sort of, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, transparency, accountability. I think all these, again, get back to that idea of making sure that the referees in the game, in other words, the government, are calling it fair.
Yeah, well, that's our challenge as a nation. And that's the hope and the dream and the opportunity of America. I mean, we've gone off the rails both directions,
yes,
and we've corrected, and we've got to do it again. Well, thank you, Dr. Davidson. It's so good to have you back in the Economic War Room.
Great to be with you, Kevin. Thank you.
Now, we're going to summarize all of this in our free economic battle plan. You can download it free from economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.